Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah shir. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Aleph, and in today's shir we will be learning Daf Nun Ches Amud Aleph as well as a piece of Nun Ches Amud Beis. So we are continuing to learn Hilchas Tefillin. We pick up today Nun Zayin Amud Beis, Siman Lamed Gimel, Sif Hey, bottom line in the Mechaber. The Mechaber says, Sif Hey, Im Nifsika HaRitzua, if the Ritzua, one of the straps of the Tefillin, tears, becomes torn, im nifsika ritzua, and it tears so that it is actually split into two pieces. Says the Mechaber, yesh matirim litvar mitzad pinim. There is a shita, this is brought down in Taisus and the Rush, there are shitas that hold that you could sew the ritzua back together again, but that you must sew it mitzad pinim. You have to make the stitching on the inside of the ritzua, not the part of the ritzua that's going to show on its exterior. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Katan Chav Hey, and that's on Nun Ches Amud Aleph, several lines down in the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Yesh Matirim, and the Mishnah Berurah points out that this shita, the shita of Taisus and the Rush, who says that you could repair the ritzua by stitching it back together again, they hold afilu b'sayr chashir shemakif harosh v'akibaris. This yesh matirim holds that you could stitch the ritzuas back together again, and that's okay even if on the shalrosh the ritzua rips where it actually goes around the head, or if on the shalyad the ritzua rips on the part of the ritzua where it goes around the arm and becomes fastened to the arm. Now those are the most critical parts of the ritzuas. Where the ritzua of the shalrosh goes around the head, that's where what affixes the tefillin to the head. It's the ritzua that goes around the head. What affixes the shalyad to the arm? The ritzua that goes around the arm. So these are the most critical parts of the ritzuas. The yesh matirim over here holds that even if the ritzuas rip in one of those places, you could stitch that back together again, and it's kosher. Eis kan chafav litvar. The heter over here is to stitch the ritzuas back together again. Says the Chavetz Chaim, dafka tfira. When we say that you could repair the ritzua, that's only through sewing, only through stitching. Aval kishira b'sayr shir hanal, but to tie the ritzuas together, so the ritzua split, and you want to take the two ends and make some kind of a knot and tie it together. L'kulei alma pasal min haTorah. Over there, everybody would agree that if the ritzua rips around the head or around the arm, and you want to go ahead and tie the two ends of the tear together, everybody would hold that is pasal midaraisa. Why? Diksiv, because the pasuk says ukishartam, and we look at the word ukishartam means and you should tie them. But we look at the word ukishartam as a contraction of two words. The Dirshu Chazal darshan the word ukishartam in the Gemara in Menachos Lamed Hey Amud Beis as two words, kesher tam. You need a complete tying. Dahainu, this means haritzua shekaisher b'hatfilin, the ritzua that you use to tie the tefillin onto yourselves, tehitama, it has to be complete, it has to be whole, ushleima, complete, v'loy keshura, not tied together. So, what the Chavetz Chaim is telling us over here is like this: when the Mechaber brings down the sheet of Taisus and the Rush, who hold that if the ritzua becomes torn, you're allowed to repair the ritzua, and not only are you allowed to repair it, you're allowed to repair it even where it goes around the head, and even when it goes where it goes around the arm. That's only if you're going to repair it through stitching, because stitching makes it back into one piece. Tying it together, that does not make a repair that now allows us to look at this ritzua as one ritzua. No, it's two pieces tied together. And that's a chesaron in ukishartam. That's not considered a keshira tama, and that would be pasal midaraisa. Continues the Chavetz Chaim, and he says, Gam hatfira hu dafka begidin v'loy bechutin. Not only that, but if you do stitch the ritzuas together, you can't use thread. You have to use gidin. You have to use sinews of probably a behemoth tahira. It doesn't say here that it has to be a behemoth tahira, but the ritzuas have to be from the of a behemoth tahira, we learned. I would assume that the stitching that you're going to use gidin, you could use sinews of an animal. My assumption is that it has to be gidin of a behemoth tahira. Kasav v'tshuvas dvar Shmuel in nifseku ha'ma'abarta motor l'tafra. Chavetz Chaim, as an aside, mentions over here, once we're speaking about repairing tefillin through stitching, tells us another halacha, and again, this points to the difference between the bottom that we have nowadays and the bottom that they had in days gone by, which were usually made out of dakos, out of the hides of small animals like a sheep, which was much softer and much thinner. He says if the mabarta, which again is the area of the bias that the ritzua passes through, if the mabarta detaches from the rest of the bias, you could stitch it back on, and that would be kosher. Okay, the Mechaber said that this yesh batirim that allows you to stitch the ritzua together, that's okay, but the stitches have to be done mitzad pinim. They have to be done on the inside of the ritzua. Says the Mishnah Berurah, why is that? Kedei shelo yeh minkar mibachutz klal. We don't want the stitching to be recognizable on the exterior of the ritzua at all. It has to be something which you can't see. I believe this comes from Rashi. Yeah, it's a Rashi in Menachos Lamed Hey Amud Beis. So we want the stitching to be mitzad pnim kedei shelo yeh minkar mibachutz klal. V'chol shekein imakam atfira kanos l'soicha ma'abarta d'shari l'deyazu. Sometimes the ritzua could rip inside the mabarta, right? Let's say this ripped, and now you make a repair, and you make the repair so that it's going to be hidden inside the mabarta. So then again, it's something that can't be seen. As long as it can't be seen, it is okay. Okay, so here we had the first shita brought down by the Mechaber. So again, we're talking about a ritzua that tore either the ritzuas of the shalyad or the ritzuas of the shalrosh. The first shita brought by the Mechaber is the shita of Taisus and the Rosh, which is you're allowed to repair the ritzua by stitching it back together using gidin. And the big heter, the big kula of this shita is that you could even do this on the part of the ritzua that goes around the head or the part of the ritzua that goes around the arm. That's the first shita. Now we're going to see another shita. Top line, Nun Ches Amud Aleph. V'yesh omrim, however, we have a Trumas Hadeshen. V'yesh omrim, there's another shita that says, Mashay makif bimena harosh, the part of the ritzua that goes around the head and affixes the shal rosh to the head, ubishal yad, and the part of the ritzua of the shal yad, kedei shetakif hazroya, where the ritzua goes around the arm, likshar hatfila im hazroya, and that's what binds the bias of the shal yad to the arm, ukedei shetimatach ad etzba emtsois. So let's just take this a little bit at a time. First, this Yesh Omrim says, see, this Yesh Omrim is going to be more machmir than the first sheet. The first sheet is said you could repair the ritzua even where it goes around the head and even where it goes around the arm. The second sheet is going to be more machmir, and the second sheet is going to say that both by the shal rosh and the shal yad, there is a certain minimum length of ritzua that you cannot go ahead and repair through stitching. What is that amount of ritzua? So by the shal rosh, it's the ritzua that goes around the head. That's the first thing that the Mechaber says here. The yesh omrim mashe makif mimena harosh. By the shal rosh, the part of the ritzua that surrounds the head, we're going to be more machmir. Now he starts to describe the part of the ritzua of the shal yad that we're going to be machmir on, and let's pay attention to what the Mechaber says. Ubi shal yad, in the case of the shal yad, how much of the ritzua do you need without a repair? Kedei shetakif hazraya, so that you could go around the arm, likshar hatfila im hazraya, so that you have enough ritzua to bind the bias to the arm, but you need even more than that. Ukidei shetimatach, and enough ritzua so that you could stretch the ritzua down ad etzba emtsois, until the middle finger, v'yikrach mimena al oisei etzba sholosh krichos v'yikshar, and then you should be able to do 3 twists on the middle finger and tie it. So that's like this. He's saying like this. You need enough ritzua so that you could go around the arm. Okay? So here, I'm around the arm. Now I'm going to take the ritzua straight down, not making any winds. And I'm going until the middle finger, and I'm doing 3 twists around the middle finger. So you see that? That's what we did. So the Yesh Omrim says that this amount of ritzua, I'm going to read it again inside. The Yesh Omrim, ma shemakif bimena harosh, enough ritzua on the shalyad to go around the head. Uba shalyad, and in the case of the shalyad, kedei shetakav azroya, enough ritzua to go around the arm, likshar tefillah azroya, to bind the bias of the tefillah with the arm. Ukedei shetimach ad etzba emtsois, and enough ritzua to go down straight to the middle finger. V'yikrach mimena al oisei etzba sholosh krichos, and enough ritzua to wind around the middle finger 3 times. V'yikshar, and then affix it in place. That amount of ritzua by the shalrosh and the shalyad, ein lahem takana loy b'kshira v'loy b'tfira. That amount of ritzua you need without any tears and repairs. You cannot have that torn and then repair it, not with kshira, certainly not by tying, v'loy b'tfira, and not even with stitching. V'chol yisrain ha'irich, but any excess length beyond that amount, shehu b'shvil shekarech haritzua kama pa'amim savev azraya, the amount of excess ritzua that you need on the shalyad to be able to make winds around the arm, ub'shalroish b'ashetoli mimena, and in the case of the shalroish, the excess, so to speak, ritzua that's going to hang down, einat tvira v'akshira paislim ba. Over there, the Yesh Omrim says that over there, you could have tefira, if it's torn, you could stitch it together, you could even tie it together. So here we have the 2 shittas. We have the shitta number 1 that says the ritzua ripped, you could stitch it back together again. Not only could you stitch it back together again, you could stitch it back together again, even the critical part of the ritzua of the shalrosh that goes around the head, and even the critical part of the shalyad that goes around the arm. That's the first shita. The Yesh Omrim, the Trubas Hadeshet, is more machmer. He says there's a part of the ritzua, both by the shalrosh and the shalyad, that has to be whole, without any repairs, not even tefira. What's that part? By the shalrosh, it's the part that goes around the head, and zehu. By the shalyad, it's what goes around the arm, goes straight down to the finger, 3 times around the finger. After that, any additional ritzua on the shalyad, or any additional ritzua on the shalrosh, if it rips, you could tie it, you could stitch it, you could do whatever you want. And the mechaber is machriya. Finally, here at the end, he says the b'shas adchak, yesh lismaich al hamatirim. If you have a shas adchak, you're stuck. There's the only tefillin that you have. If you're not going to be able to use it, you're going to be chas v'sholem mevatel mitzvahs tefillin. So in the shas adchak says the mechaber yesh lismaich al hamatirim kedei shelo yispatel mitzvahs tefillin. We could rely on the first opinion so that we shouldn't chas v'chalila be mevatel the mitzvah of tefillin. Now let's see the Mishnah Berurah here. Ois Kal Chav Ches. The Yesh Omrim, brought down by the Mechaber, said that in the case of the shalyad, you need enough ritzua to go around the arm, down the arm to the middle finger, and then around the finger. Etzba, Ritzono Loymar, what the Mechaber wants to say is, Shetimatach haritzua b'loy krichos. You're going to extend the Ritzuah straight down the arm without doing any winds around the arm. Because this is the minimum shear for the Ritzuahs of the Shalyad. Somebody asks you, how long does the Ritzuahs of the Shalyad have to be? The answer is that the Ritzuah of the Shalyad, the minimum length is enough to go around the arm, straight down the arm to the middle finger, and 3 times around the middle finger. So that's the amount that this shita holds, has to be whole without any repairs. Now, why are we being more makel with the shal roish than we are with the shal yad? In what sense are we being more makel? Well, this yesh omrim, that's more machmir, the second opinion of the mechaber, the Trumas Hadeshen, that's more machmir than the shita of Taisus and the Rush. By the shal yad, what does he hold? He holds that you need enough to go around the arm. Now that's the part that binds the tefillin to the arm, right? So if you want to compare the shal roish and the shal yad, by the shal roish, the Trumas Hadeshen is saying, you need the ritzuah that goes around the head, nothing more. Well, the ritzuah that goes around the head, that's the part of the ritzuah that binds the tefillin shal roish to the head. So over there, the Trumas Hadeshen says, that part must be completely whole without any repairs. The part that stretches down, that could be repaired. So again, what part has to be whole? The part that actually binds the shal roish to the head. Okay, now let's look at the shal yad. What's the part of the ritzuah that binds the tefillin of the shal yad to the arm? L'chayra, that's the part that goes around the arm. Yet the Trumas Hadeshen says that by the shal yad, that's not enough. You need the part that goes around the arm, and you got to be able to go down the arm to the finger, and then you got to be able to go around the finger. So says the Chavetz Chaim over here in the end of Eiskal Chavches, Va'atam dehekel b'shal roish. The reason that we're being more makel by the shal roish, whereby the shal roish we say you only need the part that actually binds it to the head, but by the shal yad we need more than that. Va'atam dehekel b'shal roish. Ayin b'darkei Moshe, he sends us to the Ramah, the Darkei Moshe on the tour. Now, if you take a look over there, the answer is because it seems that the Trumas Hadeshen holds that it's not a valid comparison. By the shal roish, the part of the ritzuahs that hang down, they don't help to affix the shal roish in place at all. The only part of the ritzuah that assists in keeping the shal roish on your head is the part that goes around the head. The rest of it is like decorative. It doesn't help in the kishira at all. Says the Darkei Moshe, that's not true by the shal yad. By the shal yad, the part that goes around your arm, that's where the bias of the shal yad is affixed to the arm. But what holds that in place? That's loose. All it is like a slip knot. All it is the ritzuah going through a loop. So what keeps that affixed in place? Says the Darkei Moshe, the fact that we tighten it, and then we bring it down our arm, and then we go 3 turns around the middle finger, and then we stick the ritzuah in and make a kishira, that's what holds this whole operation in place. So the Darkei Moshe says, by the shal yad, I need all of that, because that's part of affixing the tefillin shal yad in place. Okay. Now we go to Eiskal Chavtes. The Mechaber told us that in a Shasat Chak, we could rely on the first opinion. We could rely on the first Kuladik opinion, the opinion of the Taisus and the Rush, the Yesh Matirim. Eiskal Chavtes, Ha-Matirim. In a Shasat Chak, we could rely on the Matirim. Chavetz Chaim reminds us, Hainu, what does this mean? That we could paskin, in a Shasat Chak, we could paskin like the Day Rishona. Hainu. The mutter afilu litvar begidim b'soich hashir shemakif harosh v'akiberis. According to the first shita, you could repair the torn ritzuas with stitching with gidin, even around the head and even around the arm. V'chutz l'shir hazeh, and beyond the part that goes around the head and the part that goes around the arm, mutter afilu likshar. Over there, according to the Day Rishona, you'd even be allowed to tie the ritzuas back together again. even without tfiras. V'choshke litfar b'chutim. Certainly, if you wanted to stitch the torn ritzua back together again, but using thread, not using gidon, according to the Dei Rishona, this would be mutter. Because the Dei Rishona is so makel, the Dei Rishona holds that you could sew the ritzuas back with gidon, even around the arm, around the head, and even around the arm. Beyond that, you could do even keshira, you could do even tfira with thread, not with gidon. Aval, however, says the Chavetz Chaim, bechol zeh ein yochel levarich aleim. But even though we could paskin like the Dei Rishona, b'shas adchak, says the Chavetz Chaim, that's only so that you should not be mevatel the mitzvah saseh of tefillin, but you're not going to make a bracha. Ki me'ikar adin tzarich lahachmer ka'yesh oimrim, because really we paskin like the more chumradic opinion. Really we paskin like the yesh oimrim, and this is one of the klolim that we have in the mechaber when the mechaber says yesh oimrim and then a second yesh oimrim. We usually paskin like the second yesh oimrim. And over here in Sif Hey, what does the mechaber say? He says yesh matirim, and then he says v'yesh oimrim. So we really paskin like the yesh oimrim. And the reason we paskin like the yesh oimrim is because the suffix Torah l'chumra. Because whenever we're dealing with the suffix Taraisa, we go l'chumra. However, Kedei shelo yevatel legamri is a mitzvah, says we don't want chas v'chalila, we don't want you to be mevatel the mitzvah of tefillin, yanichem ad sheyimtza acherim. You could put the tefillin on like the yesh matirim, the first opinion, until you have other tefillin, but you should not make a bracha. Okay, so far what the Chavetz Chaim has told us over here in Ois Katan Chav Tes is yes, like the Mechaber says, in Hashas Adchak, we rely on the yesh matirim. However, we don't make a bracha. Now he's going to bring down some other opinions. Vayin b'Taz, he says, take a look at the Taz. She'poisek upaskins, the gam b'ritzua shel roish ein yachal avarech aleha, that not only can you not make a bracha if you're relying on the yesh matirim and you're stitching the ritzuas back together again where it goes around the head, the Taz is even more machmer. The Taz says, the gam b'ritzua shel roish, if you're talking about repairs to the ritzua of the shel roish, ein yachal avarech aleha, you cannot make a bracha on a repaired shel roish ad sheyeh haritzua shel yamin ad hatabor usmail ad hachazeh shleima b'li keshira u'tfilah. The Taz is machmer and holds, not only should you not make a bracha if there's a tear where it goes around the head and you fixed it with stitching. Let's say the tear is where the ritzuas hang down in front of you. The Taz says that the right hand ritzua has to go down all the way until the navel, and the left hand ritzua has to go down at least till the chazeh, at least till the breastbone. And that has to be without any repairs. If it ripped shorter than that and you repaired it, the Taz is machmer, says you cannot make a bracha. Aval b'sefer el Yerabah ichri el halacha. But when it comes to but if you look at the Sefer el Yerabah, he paskins the biggest kula of all. He paskins the bein b'shal roish ubein b'shal yad, both by the shal roish and the shal yad. Levad ma sheyesh b'seich hashir shemakif haroish v'hakiboris. Any part of the ritzua, besides the part that goes around the head and the part that goes right around the arm, yachal the tafrai, you're allowed to stitch it back together again. Af shaloi b'shas adchak, even if it's not a shas adchak, or levarech aleim, and you can make a bracha. So the El Yerabah is more mekel even than the Mechaber. The Mechaber said that you could rely on the yesh matirim b'shas adchak. The El Yerabah is saying you could rely on the yesh matirim even not with the shas adchak, and you can even make a bracha. Actually, zar litvar mitzad pnim shelo yeminkar tfiris b'bachutz. Just you should make sure that the stitching is on the inside and not visible from the outside. Dimhu minkar lo odif bikesher, because he says if the stitching is visible, then that's not considered a repair that makes the ritzua into one piece. If the stitching is visible, then it's like tying the two ends of the tefillah together. If it's mamish an invisible repair, then it makes it back into one piece, and then you could do it even shalom b'shas adchak, and you could even make a bracha. Now, I think I might have just worded something a little bit wrong. I just want to be clear. The kula over here of the El Yerabah, it does not include the part that goes around the head. He says, Levad ma sheyesh b'seich hashir shemakev harosh v'kibayris. Anything beyond what goes around the head or goes right around the arm. Anything beside that you could repair with stitching, even shalom b'shas adchak. Okay. V'gam shiyah begidin, and the stitching, of course, has to be done with gidin. Ava b'chutin or kshira asar afilu b'shal rosh. V'chein pasak b'sefer Yeshuas Yaakov v'b'derech hachayim. U'mekamakayim, says the Chavetz Chaim, im yachal hasig ritzua shlema. Certainly, if you have the ability to get a new ritzua, which is a complete ritzua, bevadai nachal lahachmer lechatchila ka'ataz. Certainly, we should be machmer like the shita of the taz that we brought down over here. That the shalroish you need, even the straps that hang down. The right one has to be until the navel, the left one until the chazeh. Ki kama me'achreinis vanenu atiku dvar v'halacha. Ach be'bekamat chak bevadai yachal lismach al kol ha'ga'onim anal levarech. B'shas adchak, you could be savich on the El Yerabah, and those who said like him. And if you have a tear outside of where it goes around the head or where it goes right around the arm, you could even make a bracha. Ubefrat im nishar b'hashal roish shnei tvachim tluyim levad nashek makif haroish. Certainly, if you have two tvachim of ritzuas hanging down by the shalroish, bevada yesh lismach lahakal de bahani tfira. V'ayin la'el b'sim chavzayim v'Mishnah Berurah kat memdal. Im nifsika haritzua berachba. Let's say the ritzua splits along its length, so that now you don't have a wide enough ritzua on both sides of the tear. Im nifsika haritzua berachba v'lo nishpak yishir sa'ira, so that it's not the width of a barley corn. Hinyach ha-pri begada b'tzarech iyun. The pri begada bleibt with the tzarech iyun irashoy litvar, if you could stitch it back together again. Okay, that closes out Siman Lamed Gimel. Now we move on to Siman Lamed Daled, where we get really introduced to the minig of having a second pair of tefillin for Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. Excuse me. Says the Mechaber Siman Lamed Daled, Seder hanachas on a parshiyos betfillin, the proper order of inserting the parshiyos into the bottom of the tefillin. V'hamahadrim asher lahem shtei zugos tefillin, and the sheet of the mahadrim who have two pairs of tefillin. Ubay daled seifim, and here we have 4 seifim. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph, Seder hanachasan babotim, the order in which you're supposed to insert the parshiyos into the bottom. La Rashi v'harambam, according to Rashi and the Rambam, Kadesh mismoil hameniach babayis hachitzai. The parsha of Kadesh goes to the left of the wearer. Okay, so your shalroish is on like this. The first bias we talk about to the left of the wearer. So that's this bias over here. The first bias is going to have the parsha of Kadesh. And that's the outermost bias to the left of the wearer. V'acharav ki yivyacha. The second bias is going to have the parsha of V'haya ki yivyacha. The third bias from the left, Ushema b'bayis hashlishi. Shema and V'ahavta is in the third bias. And finally, V'haya im Shemaya b'bayis haravi. V'haya im Shemaya is in the fourth bias, which is Shu bayis achitzain liyaminai, which is the outermost bias to the right of the wearer. That's the Shita of Rashi and the Rambam. So again, Rashi and the Rambam, Kadesh v'hayaki v'yacha shema v'haya im shamaya, which is the order that these parshas appear chronologically in the Torah HaKadoshah. That's the Shita of Rashi and the Rambam. Or Rabbeinu Tam, but according to Rabbeinu Tam, the third bias and the fourth bias are flipped. According to Rabbeinu Tam, Babayas Ashlishi v'haya im shamaya. The third bias is v'haya im shamaya. Ubabayas haravi shu bias achitzaim. And in the fourth bias, which is the outer bias, Shema, over there is where you put the parsha of Shema in the Ahavta. U'minig ha'olam kerashi v'Rambam. And the minig that we follow is the minig of Rashi and the Rambam. Okay, let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Back on Nun Ches Amud Aleph, Mishnah Berurah is cut in Aleph. Seder Hanachosam. Now, the Mishnah Berurah is going to point out that realize, okay, not yet in this one. Okay, let's just read Is cut in Aleph. Da, you should know. The Lekule Alma, according to everybody, Rashi, the Rambam, Rabbeinu Tam, Im Hechlif Eze Parsha, Shenesana Shaloi Bebeis HaMiyuchad, if you put any parsha into the wrong bias, psulin, the tefillin are puzzle. After yesh arba parshiyos ba'arba botim. If you just take the tefillin, the parshiyos of the Shalroish, and you haphazardly stick them into different batim, while it's true that you have 4 parshiyos and 4 batim, if they're not in the proper order, then everybody agrees that the tefillin are puzzle. Certainly if you would take 2 parshiyos and stick them into one bias, those tefillin would be puzzle. Ois Cotton Bays, the Mechaber said, he describes where we should put the parshiyos going from the left of the wearer. So the bias Rishon is called the leftmost bias from the perspective of the wearer, not from the perspective of somebody who's looking at the wearer, from the perspective of the wearer. Says the Mishnah Cotton Bays, Va'afilu im haminiachu iter, even if the wearer of the tefillin is a lefty, azlinon basa yaminu smal the alma, we don't change anything. We go by standard left and right. Ois Cotton Gimel ula Rabbeinu Tam. According to the Rabbeinu Tam, the order is different. So according to Rashi and Rambam, it's Kadesh v'hayaki v'yacha shema v'hayim shemaya. That's Rashi and the Rambam. According to Rabbeinu Tam, Kadesh v'hayaki v'yacha v'hayim shemaya shema. Now, the Mishnah Berurah is going to point out this whole discussion only applies to the Seder, the order that you put them into the parshiyos, into the bottom. That's the order that the parshiyos have to be inside the bottom. But that's not the order in which the parshiyos have to be written. Everybody agrees that the parshiyos have to be written. Remember, tefillin have to be written kisidron. Everybody agrees that the parshiyos have to be written in the order of Kadesh v'hayaki v'yacha shema v'hayim shemaya, because they have to be written in the order in which they appear in the Torah HaKadoshah. Rabbeinu Tam agrees with that. Just Rabbeinu Tam holds that the parsha of Shema and the parsha of v'hayim shemaya, you flip them as far as which bottom you put them in. But they must be written in the Seder that they appear in the Torah. Now, when it comes to the Shel Rosh, so no biggie. You write the parsha of Kadesh, you write the parsha of v'hayaki v'yacha, you write the parsha of Shema, you write the parsha of v'hayim shemaya. And then according to the Rabbeinu Tam, first you put in Kadesh, then you put in v'hayaki v'yacha, then you put in v'hayim shemaya, then you put in Shema. But what do you do with the Shel Yad? On the Shel Yad, all 4 of these parshas are written on one piece of cloth. Now, according to Rabbeinu Tam, the same way the parshas in the Shel Rosh have to be in the order of Kadesh v'hayaki v'yacha v'hayim shemaya and Shema, so too in the Shel Yad. Also, they have to be written, not when you write it, they have to appear on the cloth, Kadesh v'hayaki v'yacha v'hayim shemaya Shema. That's the way they have to appear on the one piece of cloth. But that's not the way you write it. You write it Kadesh v'hayaki v'yacha Shema v'hayim shemaya. So what you have to do is, You have to write Kadesh on the first column. Then you have to write Vayikiviyach on the second column. Then you have to skip the third column. And you have to write Shema on the fourth column. And then you have to go back to the third column and write Volume Shemaya on the third column. So now you wrote the Parshiyas Kisidron, but they appear on the cloth in the proper order according to the Rabbeinu Tam. Let's see this inside Mishnah Berurah's Cotton Gimel here on Nun Ches Amud Beis. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Kosra Paiskim. The Paiskim write, the Gam Rabbeinu Tam loyded to be inon ksivasam kiseder shem ksuvin b'Torah. The Rabbeinu Tam, who holds that in order of appearance, V'hayim Shemaya has to come before Shema, and in the order of the four batim of the Shalosh, V'hayim Shemaya goes in an earlier bias before Shema, but he also agrees that when you write the Parshiyos, you have to write them in chronological order the way they appear in the Torah Dirshu. Kisei Shem Ksuvim b'Torah, Shehu Kaddish Vayikiviyach Shema V'hayim Shemaya. Ella, the Polig Rashi, he only argues on Rashi, Le'inyan Hanachosan Babatim, when it comes to the question of which Batim to put them in the Sharosh. Va'al Kain. Therefore, Haroitza Lichtov Tfilin L'das Rabbeinu Tam. Somebody wants to write Rabbeinu Tam Tfilin. Yichtov B'Shal Yad, when he's writing the Shal Yad, he should write it as follows. Yichtov B'Shal Yad Shem B'Klaf Echad. You should write the Shal Yad, which is one piece of cloth, in the following way. Kadesh. First you write Kadesh on the first column. V'haya Kiviyach on the second column. V'yaniach Cholok V'haya Im Shemaya. Then leave blank the third column, on which eventually you're going to write V'haya Im Shemaya. V'yichtov Shema. Then write Shema on the fourth column. V'achakach Yichtov V'haya Im Shemaya. Then you go back to the third column and you write Vayim Shemaya. When it comes to the Shalrosh, it's simple. Yichtevein ba'arba klofim. You write each parsha on a separate cloth. Keseder mamish, in the order in which it appears in the Torah. Kaddish Vayikiviyach Shema Vayim Shemaya. V'yesadrein babatim. And then you insert them into the bottom in the proper order. What's the proper order according to Rabbeinu Tam? Kaddish Vayikiviyach Vayim Shemaya Shema. Ule'inyin dine psuchais ustumais ba'tfilin. 1 second, I just inadvertently cut off my audio recording. So let me just back up a drop. So, Valkena writes a lichtay tfilin ladas Rabbeinu Tam, yichtayv b'shal yad shei b'klaf echad, kadesh v'yikiviyach v'yina cholak v'yim shemaya, v'yichtayv shema, v'achakach yichtayv v'yim shemaya. U'b'shal roish, when it comes to the shal roish, yichtayvim ba'arba klofim, keseder mamish, you write them on 4 separate pieces of cloth in the order in which they appear in the Torah, v'yesadrim babatim, and then you put them in the bottom in the proper order. Kadesh v'ayim kiviyach v'yim shemaya shema. Ol inyan dinei psuchais ustumais patfilon ekle esnaig l'daitoi kvar biyarnu le'el bezes Hashem b'siman lamed beis if cotton kuf samach aleph ayin sham. What he's referring to over here is a very complex discussion that we had earlier in Siman lamed beis. We have learned the different minhagim of the individual parshiyos of the tefillin. Some of them are supposed to be written as psuchais, as open parshiyos. Some of them are supposed to be written as stumais. And we described in great detail back in Siman lamed beis what to do according to the shita of Rabbeinu Tam. Finally, Ois Katan Daled, the Mechaber said that we paskin the olam, the minig is Kirashi v'Rambam, the Kasav of Beis Yosef v'Shar Chreinim, the Chen Iker, that the Iker halacha follows Rashi and the Rambam, the Chen Hiskim Hagra b'Biurah, and the Gra and the Bir Hagra writes that as well. Okay? Thank you so much for joining me for Living Out Torah. This was a Living Out Torah Shiri Began and God's Klal Yisrael. The Rebbe should say Yeshua's first Parnasa, should do him to all those in need, and we should be zeichet to see the Bias Kael Tzedek, B'mheriv Yameinu Amen. Be well.